Hello, everybody. Whether you're watching, whether you're listening, today I have with me Mark Vicente. Mark is an award-winning filmmaker and an author. He is a former member of the NXIVM cult. He's also one of the whistleblowers. Story is outlined in the HBO series The Vow. He's also the host of the What the Is on My Mind podcast and his YouTube channel. Hello, Mark. It is good to see you again.
So good to be here. It's so good. We saw each other, what did you say, a month ago?
It was about a month or so ago. Yeah,
Ah,
maybe
time
just over.
flies.
Yeah,
Time flies.
I know I haven't aged a day. Um, I would like to talk to you today about your experiences, about the cult, about what was going on with you internally as well, even what happened coming out of that, as well as the work that you're doing today. But for anyone who might have been living under a rock and doesn't know the story, what exactly was Nexium?
Yeah, so Nexium, that was the overall umbrella term. We knew it as ESP or executive, I can't even say it, executive success programs. I must have some
Hmm.
kind of block in there. So that's what we knew it as. And so the way they sold themselves was, a business program, a
Hmm.
program to help people with business, but specifically to help people create or run ethical businesses.
Okay.
And in order to run an ethical business, you need to be an ethical human being. So we need to look at your programming that you have that's less than optimal, that might be unethical, and there was a lot of discussion about, ethics and morality and this and that and the other. So
Uh-huh.
it was sold as a sort of it was a human potential program, but it was sold as a business program that there was a lot of internal work. That was the exterior. On the interior, there were a lot of really criminal things going on that were hidden from pretty much everybody.
Mm.
And towards the end, what we found out that the leader was actually he had this secret society of women that he was blackmailing, using collateral from them, like naked pictures, videos, a whole bunch
Uh-huh.
of things to get them to be obedient. And they were basically his slaves. And that's the thing that we eventually got the FBI to start looking at that. And that's what blew the entire thing up. That's in a nutshell, the sort of exterior and then
Mm.
internally what was really going on.
And so the public face and the private face very rarely match. You find that in a lot of organizations,
Yeah.
companies, even little charity groups, little community groups. You
Yeah.
find it as well in families. There's a very public face where upstanding, moral people, we do this, that, and the other, and behind closed doors, it is bedlam and chaos.
Yes. Yes. And the thing about it as well is the distance between those two in this case, the distance between the public face. I
Hmm.
mean, for those that have seen The Vow, I mean, there's documentation of, I go to India with the leader and the second in command to meet the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama ends up endorsing the leader and the program, so that's the external and the internal, you have a man with these really screwed up appetites. And the disgusting part is that he had all these sex slaves in the end that my friends, I didn't realize were sex slaves. And in the end, they were cauterizing his initials on each other's pubic mounds, like tattooing a prostitute. And there was a lot of dark stuff that came out, during the trial. So in this case, what was so extraordinary is just the distance between those two
Yeah.
things.
And what you're describing there, I mean, when you think of the narcissistic, psychopathic types, it's a lot of time we're talking about it's control and domination, but what you're describing there is it's like ownership. I own you.
It is. It is. And there's a kind of sadism. You see, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Certainly at the beginning, I had no idea. I considered him to be a mentor. I considered him to some degree to be sort of this enlightened being, who was just an ordinary guy, but, very enlightened. But in the end, what I understood is that I'd been dealing with sort of a dark tetrad individual because there was a sadism, but he sort of the way he behaved was exceptionally humble. Like he never, the expression in America, pump your own tires. He never pumped his own tires.
Right.
Everybody else did that. Um,
Yeah.
and he seemed very humble and unassuming. But, you know, eh, when you read the court transcripts of the stuff that was coming out, the text messages, the level of juvenile thinking that he had, because what I understood more and more about him, especially as the trial was underway, is that what I'd been dealing with was a toddler in an adult's body. He just hid
Yeah.
the toddler from most people until, you know, he got triggered or activated, usually in relation to a relationship he was having with a woman. That's where this insane, you know, jealousy would come out. But the problem with these people as well, it's not only that they're wearing a mask, you buy into the mask because there's something you're looking for as well. You know,
Yeah.
so you know, you overlay your perfect vision on somebody else. And so it's not just that it's this weird co-participation of this game, which is that they're wearing a mask, but you're propping the mask up because God forbid the person you're following turns out to be a monster. And that in the end, you know, 12 years later was my sort of come to Jesus, was like, oh
Yeah.
my God, I've been following, you know, some kind of psychopath and had no idea.
Yeah. And it's, as you say that, what comes to mind is this was way back, it might have been the late 90s, early 2000s. There was a television program I watched, and I only ever got to watch the first 10 minutes of it. I so regret not watching the rest, but it was called Signs and Wonders.
Hmm.
And it was about this young girl who had went off to travel America. She'd joined a cult. And the program begins with the mother arriving in America. She's going to try and get her daughter back. And she meets this guy at the airport who's come to collect her. And she's being very nice, little typical British housewife. Thank you very much for meeting me. And, thanks very much for helping me. And he is so, he's curt with her. He's abrupt with her. He leaves her to carry her own bags and everything, saying, hurry up.
Hmm.
And they get into the car. And as they go off in the car, she's thanking him that he's going to help her. And he starts saying, have you got the money? She says, yes, 20,000. So we agreed. And he says, well, that's per day. And she's,
Hmm.
what? What? I don't understand. I thought that was his, no, that's per day. You want me to get your daughter back? You want me to rescue your daughter? You want me to deprogram her? That's not free. What I do
Hmm.
costs. And she starts to get upset, and he starts to shout at her for being upset, and she's starting to apologize for being upset. And
Hmm.
it's a horrendous 10 minutes or so. But then he just pulls the car over and he says to her, I've only known you a few minutes, and in those few minutes, you've let me abuse you. You've let me to treat you like dirt. You've let me treat you with absolute contempt. You're actually apologizing to me because you're upset. So why would you do that? And she's confused as you would be. And then he explains to her, you think I have something you need.
Hmm.
You think I can do something for you that no one else can. You think I'm going to solve your problems.
Hmm.
And the point he was trying to make is your daughter did not join the cult because there's something wrong with her. She joined this cult because they have lied to her. They've led her to believe they can
Hmm.
fix her, they can do
Yeah.
something. And as I was watching that, I thought, yes, this is all about a cult, absolutely. But what struck me was what had just transpired was pretty much any abusive narcissistic relationship.
Yes.
You meet someone and they become the very thing you need,
Yeah.
or at least you believe that you need.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, the process I talk about, what they do is they try to figure out what you need, you know, and
Mm,
what your fears are. You know, I call it in terms of the cults, I call it data mining. They're mining you for
mm,
information. So for instance, in the organization that I was in, when you came in, you were answering in-depth question like, what's your greatest fear? You know, what do you yearn
mhm.
for? What are you most embarrassed about? You know, what do you most regret? And pretty soon you start to map out an understanding of what this person's yearnings are and what their fears are.
Yeah.
And then they would always talk about, you know, everything you're doing is driven by this inner deficiency. You think, and this is smart in some ways, you think you have this hole that needs to be filled. So you're doing all the stuff in your life, and we're going to help you fill the hole, which is not what they do. What they're doing is they're mapping the hole
Mm,
so that they have a clear understanding of how they can later, you know, coerce you, understanding, you know, what your weaknesses are and what you want. So for instance, you know, if somebody comes in and they've felt abandoned their whole life, and they were looking for family. You help them understand, you can fulfill yourself. You don't need that, on the one hand. On
Mhm.
the other hand, because they know this about the person, if the person ever steps out of line, they could then leverage their fear of being cast out.
Yeah,
Not saying it specifically, but touching upon
it's
that fear of,
implied. Yeah.
it's implied, because if you say something, you're going to be cast out of the tribe. They would never say that, but it's implied. So I mean, I remember, um, in but 2 years before I finally left, I wrote a letter to the executive board talking about a lot of the problems I was seeing in the company. And I was on the executive board. And I remember writing, I'm afraid to even say this. And I said to them,
Mm.
and isn't it strange that I'm afraid? I shouldn't be afraid to say this. I hadn't figured out what was going on, but I was starting to see there was all this manipulation going on. And that's what starts to happen, is you start to feel so dependent on the person
Yeah.
that you feel that if you resist in any way, there's all these consequences to you. It's a very intricate. I mean, it's actually not that intricate. It's pretty simple. But once you're in the mud, it just feels very intricate.
It's it's basic bare minimum. It's, even just in a relationship with two people, it could be like the silent treatment. You're getting the silent treatment for a while, and you're
Yes.
desperately trying to get some kind of attention back. In a
Yeah.
bigger group, it's the fear of the ostracism.
Yes.
So it's not just you're always you're desperately trying to get their regard. That's what people are always chasing. That
Yeah.
narcissistic person's
Yeah.
positive regard. And whenever
Yeah.
it's being deliberately withheld, especially in a large group, it's feeling ostracized, which is almost like a kind of it's like a social death, if you know what I mean. You don't
Yes.
exist, you're not
Yes.
important.
Yes.
And just when you're saying about even, writing, I shouldn't even be afraid. I shouldn't be afraid to have to say this. The biggest sign I believe in, you talk about unhealthy relationships. How do you identify an unhealthy relationship? And people will say they're selfish or this, that, and the other. I think they're all things, yeah, but the biggest sign of an unhealthy relationship is when you fear their reaction. You
Mm.
fear the person's reaction. You fear how they're going to react, what they're going to do, what they're going to say. You fear the consequences.
Yes. Yes. And that's the thing that was so strange, is that it seems unrelated, but I kept on thinking about the way in some religions people, they say they love God and they fear God, you
Hmm.
know, God of the Old Testament versus the God of the New Testament. They're like schizophrenic. Like this one was a kill, burn, do
Hmm.
horrible things, and this one was the God of love. And I think because there's this weird, there's this trauma bonding that goes on, with a leader like this. You're afraid because you've seen what they've done to other people, and when you questioned why they did it, there was always some good reason. And at the same time, because they separate you from your normal support systems, and especially in the cult I was in, they start to have you feel that you can't even rely on your own perception and your own senses.
They rewrite your reality.
They rewrite your reality. So you start to think, well, maybe they know me better than I know myself.
Hmm.
And one thing in particular that was interesting, like Raniere, my cult leader, who's now enjoying, he's got 118 years left in prison. You know, I found out that at different times people would do something called an ethical breach with him. So I asked, what's an ethical breach? And basically they would say to me, this was the explanation. A person has their ethics and then the way they behave. And of course, we want them to match. If the person goes so against their own ethics, he can no longer work with them. There comes a point sort of like where they get so far, he can no longer work with them. And then he shuns them until they repair their ethical breach.
They have to repent.
They have to repent. When I left and I began connecting with the people that had left before, I found out in one case in particular, because there was one person from the moment I came into that organization, this person had done some kind of breach, something terrible she had done that caused him to no longer want to work with her. And of the 12 years I was there, she spent every single year trying to repair it. I found out at the end what the breach was. The breach was he wanted her to have his baby and she refused.
Oh
That was
my
the breach.
goodness.
And I was like, it's so interesting. So all this word salad
Yeah.
was to hide. He had these very simple needs and desires and wants for control. And if a person didn't do that,
Yeah.
then he would no longer work with them, he said, or interact with them. Now they'd become so dependent on him at that point that that felt like the worst kind of being kicked out of the
Yeah.
tribe possible. And as well, everybody was told, oh, so and so's in breach, so he's not working with them anymore. So you started to feel like, well, then there's
Mm.
something stinky about that individual,
Yeah.
you
That's
know?
like going back to the ostracizing. People start to ostracize the person.
Yes.
Sometimes they don't even know why. Sometimes they're doing
Yeah.
it out of fear. They might be doing it out of naivety. But
Yeah.
one way or another, the person, the whole group starts to distance themselves from them.
It's true. And, because eventually when I left and I started to understand this, I knew that there was about 5 of us that were working together, the defectors. And we understood that we'd have to get to the people inside as fast as possible because they were going to paint us in a certain light.
Mm.
It didn't take long before the inside was convinced that we were criminals and that there were indictments out against us for criminal behavior.
Wreck
And
your
so,
reputation.
yeah, so we had to move quickly, and we couldn't move quickly enough because a lot of people believed the narrative. I mean, it's just a
Yeah.
lot of, cult propaganda. They believe the narrative. And so to this day, there are still people that refuse to talk to me. There are people that there's about, I don't know, maybe between 20 to 30 sort of hardcore believers still.
Hmm.
I'm as I'm
Even after
dead to
their
them,
leader has been in prison, they're still believers.
even after, even after. Because, one of the things these people do as well, the whole, narcissistic boohoo story
Yeah.
is, I'm being oppressed by the greater forces, the FBI out to get me, blah, blah, blah. They're going to try and get me. And so you start to feel like, oh, you have to protect him against these forces. So the people that still are trying to protect him, they believe, I mean, listen, we had a 6-week trial. It was intense. And they still believe that the FBI fudged evidence. Now, I worked with the FBI for over a year, almost 2 years. I know they didn't fudge evidence.
Mm.
I know they didn't because I know what kinds of people they were, and I know how careful they were. When the Department of Justice takes on a case, um, a lot of money is going to be spent on that, and
Mhm.
and the prosecutor's reputation is riding on it, so they can't afford to do something that's going to blow the case up. So everything is by the book, you know.
Yeah.
So I know they didn't do that, but the insiders are still convinced that the FBI fudged some stuff, changed some dates to make it look like he had sex with an underage girl when they believe he didn't, but he did.
Mhm.
That was his thing, Raniere, my cult leader, his obsession, just one of the ways I started to see something was wrong. There were a few, but one of the ways is the woman closest to him began getting very, very skinny. And when I say very skinny, I don't mean like healthy skinny. I mean like concentration camp skinny.
Okay.
And they were being put on these insane diets, and all of it was because he had a certain type. All the girls he wanted, they were women, but he wanted them to look like sort of androgynous girls. So put them on diets where they would, their breasts would start to reduce and their bones would start to show, and that was his thing. So he had a certain type, and the younger the better. So they believe that none of that's true, and that the entire thing, at the defense lawyers for Raniere try to suggest that I was the architect of all his misery, that he hadn't done anything wrong, that
Well,
I,
if you
this
think about it,
filmmaker,
I was just going to say, if you think about it from his frame of reference, you are the
that's true.
subject of his misery.
That's true. I am. You know what? That brings a smile to my face.
Yeah, I'll say to people, don't be afraid to be the villain.
You know,
You'll be the
I
villain in
will.
someone's story. Don't be afraid.
Yeah, you're always the villain in somebody's story, but yeah, but the delusion's pretty strong, and
Mm.
it's funny. I used to think I vacillated when I started to wake up. I used to think like, oh my God, how stupid of me. How could I believe all these things? And then I started to look at the people that were still being
Mm,
loyal. God, how stupid they are. I think I've come to the point now where I really understand, when you have to hold on to a belief system so tightly because you think the belief system is you,
hmm.
to let it go, I get it now, feels like death,
It's like a
which is
psychological and emotional death.
psychological
Yeah.
death. But you can't even make that distinction. It feels like death, period.
Mm,
Full stop. Um, I now understand because what happened is when I let go, I sort of had what looked like it was going to be a psychotic break.
mhm,
All this suicidal ideation began, and like I was losing my mind when I
mm,
let go of the ideology. So I understand how difficult it is because what they've done is they've insinuated themselves or their belief systems, their ideology so deeply into you
yeah.
that you don't see the separation between you and your belief systems. So to let go of your belief systems feels like you're going to die, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. And we internalize a lot of things. Well, we internalize things every day. We internally we negotiate and we either accept them or reject them. But when something is presented in such a way that even if it doesn't make sense, if you actually thought about it logically, it doesn't make sense, but it sounds good. And there's a lot of people believing it.
Yeah.
And at some point, we need to be honest, it feels good to be part,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
and all of that sort of thing. To to try to let go of that, to realize that, this was wrong. This was, I was lied to. Something I often say to people, there is no shame in having been on the wrong end of a narcissistic person.
Yeah.
There is no shame in having been lied to, and there's no shame in having believed the lie.
Yeah.
Um, but that can
Yeah.
be so hard to let go of. It is. It's
Yeah.
like that psychological death. I am losing a part of me.
Yeah.
Sometimes I would say to people, well, yes, you are. Maybe you are, but it's not that you're losing a bad part. You're losing maybe part that's holding you back. You're losing a
Yes.
part that's preventing you from doing other things. You let go of that part, whatever term you want to use, you let go of that part. It's not that you become smaller or less than, it's those other parts of you start to become bigger, they become stronger, they become more galvanized.
Yeah. It's true. And I think, had you been around saying that to me at that time, I wouldn't have been able to process what you were
Mm.
saying because of just pure terror,
Mm.
and that's the thing. Like I always believe, that there were some people that were very loyal to him. And during the period of, when he was arrested and during the trial, as they were away from him more, they had space to
Yes.
start feeling and thinking, and they started questioning. But when you're constantly
When
under
you're
the
in it.
sway, it's just you're being reprogrammed every single day,
And it's going back to those fears again, we fear reactions and things and narcissistic, psychopathic, Machiavellian types. Yes, they are going to utilize the things that are important to you. They're going to weaponize them against you, your hopes, your dreams, and so on. But if you took that down to just two little things, even in a one-to-one relationship, even in the workplace, you'll find they do this. What they often target are two things. First of all, your conscience.
Mm,
You're a bad person. How could you do this?
mm.
After all I've done for you, and yeah, do you know all that sort of thing. And
Yeah,
look,
yeah,
look at how much pain. The pain I'm in is evidence of how bad
yeah,
you are. Even though you just called me out for doing whatever, my
yeah.
pain is evidence of how bad you are. So there's the conscience. They target
Mm,
your conscience. The second thing that is targeted is your fear of public opinion.
mm,
A very
mm,
common thread people will hear in narcissistic relationships where there are fights, arguments, and things like that are, what if other people knew what you were really like?
mm,
What if
mm.
people knew the type of person you are? What if I told your family what you do, what you're
Yeah,
like? Do you know what I mean? So there's the fear, there's
yeah,
the conscience, and there's the fear of what others think.
yeah.
Among other things, they're the two things that are constantly targeted, I believe.
So interesting that you say that because, it's funny. There was even in one of the educational modules, they talked about where you confuse yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you confuse yourself with your thoughts, with, you know, your beliefs. And the furthest one out, they said, was you confuse yourself with what other people think, what you think other people think.
Mm.
And that's the furthest away from true self. And it's funny because there's this weird shell game of like, they're telling you that, but at the same time, leveraging exactly what you're saying, leveraging that
Mm.
confusion at the same time. It's a very intricate trap. I think the thing that I learned as I began to wake up, because my wife was putting a lot of stuff in front of me. She was having me watch
Mm.
films and documentaries and reading stuff about narcissism. And as she began putting that stuff in front of me, I began to understand, oh, so a cult is a narcissistically abusive relationship at scale.
Yeah.
That's what helped me finally go like, oh, that's what's going on here. And that's why he's delusional and he's lying and he's got control and he has these weird moments where he does these things and then he
Mhm.
explains it this way and he gaslights you. And I was like, oh, it all began to make sense because we had even talked about cults in the organization.
Mm.
And his assertion was that there was no such thing. He says, you know, what's a cult? Nobody knows what a cult is. You know, if somebody's doing something bad, then say they're doing something bad. Later, I realized there was actually very good definitions.
Mm.
But the study of narcissism is what helped me understand, oh, okay, so this dynamic between a narcissist and a target, this happens, you know, yes, in relationships, and yes, in families, and yes, in corporations, and yes, in churches, and yes, in the new age and the whatever, the, you know, the ayahuasca cult, the, you know, the Burning Man, the all the way up to political parties and potentially entire countries. It is all the same thing. And so my obsession became seeing patterns, seeing these patterns, which is
Yeah.
funny because in the cult we were taught patterns all the time.
Mm.
You know, one of the things that we were taught all the time, which actually is quite useful, which I thought came from NLP, but now I read recently it actually comes from psychology, is the whole understanding of process versus content.
Mm.
You know, we talked about that incessantly every single day like, for 12 years. So we talked about patterns a lot, being able to see patterns and
Yeah.
pattern recognition. But I hadn't seen this pattern before. We were studying psychopathy. We were looking at narcissism in his framework.
Yeah.
But only when I got out, I was like, holy shit, that's what's going on.
It's hidden in plain sight, isn't it?
Plain sight.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary. I mean, even there's a moment in The Vow, season one, I think it's maybe it's episode 8, I think, for those people that are still going to watch it, where I have a meltdown that's captured on camera. And actually, what actually happened is I had a serious meltdown, and the team was there, and I said, "Please don't roll. I'm losing my shit." And eventually, my dear friend, who was a co-director, said to me, "We need to capture this." I said, "Okay, fine, roll." And what had happened was it was just before the trial, and I was trying to find all the particular things I needed to find for the FBI, and I stumbled upon this document. And this document was a transcription of a discussion he and I had had. And he pitched me a story. And the story he pitched me was about this guy, really good guy, working in a company, and he's got a mentor, so it's sort of a Jesus-like character. This is what Ranieri's pitching me. And this young guy is trying to figure out, like, there's something's going on. There's a psychopath in the system. And he's working with the mentor to try to figure out who the psychopath in the system. And then, of course, at the end, he realizes that the mentor is the psychopath.
Mm.
And that's also one of the storylines in Silence of the Lambs. So literally, he was teasing me 10 years before the trial,
Mm.
teasing me about the relationship that we were actually having.
Yeah. Hidden in plain sight. It's hard to see it when you're in the middle of it. It
Very
really
hard.
is. It's everybody at some point, I think, has their light bulb moment, their waking up
Yeah.
moment. Some
Yeah.
This sounds very dramatic, but I'm talking to a filmmaker, so I hope you get this. I call it our Planet of the Apes moment.
Yes.
You see the
Yes.
Statue of Liberty sticking out of the sand. It's that Charlton Heston moment.
Yes.
The biggest twist ever,
Yes.
and we realize, hold on, this is everything they're publicly preaching against.
Yeah. Yes. I have another film I think about a lot. what the wake up is like. Do you know, do you remember the end of Lord of the Flies?
Remind me, it's been a while.
So the boys have been living on the island, and it's just
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
becoming chaotic, and they're just all
Yes.
it's just murder and mayhem, and they're chasing this one kid,
Hmm.
and they finally get to the beach, and there's U.S. Marines there. The outside world has come to rescue them, and there's this moment where all the kids realize, what have we become? What have we done?
Yeah,
And that to me was part of the sort of moral injury moment of like, what have I been part of?
yeah,
Everything was inverted. Everything that I thought was good is actually evil. And vice versa. And all the people that I thought were bad were actually trying to help
yeah.
get us out. And it was a very, very shocking moment. It's very destabilizing to the psyche, but honestly, it's very necessary. It's, I don't
It
know
is.
that is there a gentle way to wake up? I'm not
Well,
sure.
you put it to this way. You said about it is a destabilizing moment, but if you think of how destabilizing it had been for so long,
Hmm.
so it is destabilizing emotionally, psychologically, but if you think about it, it's what you're seeing is maybe more stability, if that's right. What you're actually seeing the opposite. You're seeing what is normal, and
Yeah.
it's not fitting
Yeah.
with what you've had to be through. Now, for
Yeah.
some people, they could maybe they're in a workplace or they're married to someone or whatever. Now they could be watching television one night and they watch something on the TV, a movie or something, and what they're watching is exactly what's going on between them and that person or
Yes.
people they work with. And
Yes.
or they might overhear a conversation or someone's telling them about what they're going through, but one way or another, it starts to slip in. That's what's going on with me, or that's what
Hmm.
I'm recognizing. I couldn't find a name for it. I couldn't find a word for it. I thought there was something wrong with me.
Yes.
And what I'm curious to know about, because you mentioned about your wife showing you this stuff.
Yeah.
Now, it sounds to me she's a very clever girl. What she didn't do was to say to you, do you realize these people are bloody mental? They're
Yeah.
crazy. They are insane.
Yeah.
She was actually showing you things you thought you might be interested in.
Yeah. So what happened was that she had been working with a cult exit counselor
Hmm.
without my knowledge, thank goodness.
Okay.
And the counselor said, never attack the leader, ever, ever. And she'd made that mistake previously. She was pushing too much. And then the counselor said, don't do that. What you need to do is you need to show him pattern matches, is what you're saying. Show him documentaries and show him this and show him that and
Yeah.
have him read certain things and talk about a different cult. So that's what she did. She was very, very patient until there was one film. It wasn't one moment necessarily, it was a bunch of things, but there was one film I saw made by somebody who's now a friend of mine. His name's Will Allen, and he was in a cult. And he made a documentary called Holy Hell. And Holy Hell, I highly recommend to people. When I saw Holy Hell, I was like, holy shit, this is really, really familiar.
Mm.
So there were things like that that she put in front of me, and I started to see the patterns. And I watched Going Clear about Scientology. And all the Scientology defectors have become friends of mine now. So I was watching all these things, and then there was a particular actor who had left Scientology, who I liked a lot. His name was Jason Begay. She knew I loved Jason Begay and that I wanted to work with him. And so she said, "Hey, you should check out this thing. He does this interview where he talks about Scientology, and it's a 2 hour interview." And I was watching this, and there was so much that was familiar to me about what he was saying. And she knew I'd watch it because I liked the actor, and him talking about Scientology was no threat to me whatsoever. So all of those things, plus then there was this one phone call where I was beginning to reach out to some of the women. I'd heard these rumors about this blackmail society thing going on, and I reached out to some of the women. Oh, my wife said to me actually, she said, "What will it take for you to really look deeply into all these things?" And I said, being very mechanical, I said, "You need to give me data. I need
Mhm.
proof." She said, "Okay, I have two women that will talk to you." I said, "Great." So I called them up. They told me the stories, same story every time. And I'm like, holy shit, I think this guy's behind a bunch of dark stuff. And so I got on a phone call with him. which was recorded, and it's in the vow, where I begin to challenge him about this secret blackmail society, which he says he knows nothing about.
Mm.
And I know that that's not true. And there's all these little lies that are happening. There's one particular lie, and I go like, okay, if that's a lie, what else is a lie? And I dig deeper and deeper and deeper in the conversation, and I realize, oh my God, he's fucking lying.
Mm.
That to me was such a shocking thing because I was like, wait, he's never lied to me. And suddenly I was like, what if he has?
Yeah.
What if all these years he has? And then he said to me, well, could you tell me who this woman is that's saying these things? And I said to him, okay, but if you're in charge, if you're the grand master of this thing, and I tell you she's screwed because you might have collateral on her.
Mm.
And he was like, he started, doing some word salady distraction.
Mm.
And that's when I thought, all right, you are not who I thought you were. Now, was that destabilizing? Yes, but I was in sort of, I suppose, spy mode of just being very even,
Yeah.
very calm, non-reactive. I was kind of gray rocking at that point, trying to pretend that I wasn't absolutely horrified because I was.
Mm.
Like my everything just sunk, and I was like, "Oh my God." But I had to pretend that I wasn't horrified because I didn't know what he was capable of.
Mm.
Because there was this whole new shift of like, I thought I was dealing with my saintly mentor, and
Yeah.
now I realize I'm dealing with like, I hadn't got there yet, but like approaching dark tetrad, who, and you don't mess with those people,
No, no.
and so yeah, it was insane. I mean, I honestly, Darren, I still can't believe that all this happened. Like I look back at my life and go like, what a journey. My God. And luckily that, we documented everything. So, the vow is sort of in many ways real-time documentation
Mm.
of some insane things going on. For those that haven't seen it, it's a journey.
I would recommend you do watch it. I'm halfway through the first season at the moment.
Are you really?
Yeah.
Oh,
But pardon me. It's the thing about the the cult leaders, the narcissistic person. You're right. What you do not do is you do not mess around with people like that. You don't toy with them. You don't poke them with a stick or throw stones just to see what's going to happen to test their
yeah.
work. You don't do that. But just based on some of the stories that you were talking about, put it to you this way, and I don't know if there's a term for this, so I just made up one.
Mm.
I call it Icarus Syndrome.
Icarus. Yeah.
Yeah. If you think of Icarus, the wax, the feathers flying as high as he can, and what you get with people like that, the more they do, the more they think they can get away with.
Yes.
So the higher they fly, they think
Yes.
the higher they can go, the better they feel, so they want to fly higher. The more
Yes.
they get away with, the more they do. And sooner or later, it has to come crashing down. You can
Yes.
only get away with it for so long. But then you do get those people that you've mentioned, who might not have known about everything, but even though when they have the evidence in front of them, they're still going to reject it. In order for people like that to be able to fly the way they do and get away, what they do is they need to have enablers.
Yes.
They need to
Yeah.
have, in a cult, they need to have believers.
Yes.
When we were at the seminar, there was something I'd mentioned, and I do believe this to be true. They say with narcissism, there's a constant need for validation.
Hmm.
I think that's only part of it.
Mm.
There is as much, if not more, a constant need for collusion.
Mm.
They need people
Mm.
to collude with the delusions, to collude with the fantasies. Otherwise, in their minds, they're not real. They need people to believe they're special, who believe they have all the answers, who believe they
Hmm.
do all this. And some people might genuinely do. Some people like yourself wake up and they think, what the hell?
Hmm.
And all these years later, you're still thinking, what the hell?
Hmm.
Because it makes
Hmm.
it makes no sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then there's the other people who it's like one reason or another, it's like they can't make sense. We do not like things that don't make sense. And I think we often
Mm.
like the path of least resistance. But some people are so enmeshed in it, it's very, very hard to let go of. It's very hard to um Oh, I don't know. They will walk right past the Statue of
Mm-hmm.
Liberty on the beach,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
this rather than see it, if you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean. Now, for someone like yourself, who's on the other side of it and is still trying to make sense of it, because we don't like things that don't make sense, that belief system still doesn't make sense. But we have to
Yeah.
recognize they're just in a different place and so on.
Yeah.
Maybe at some point they will come to a gradual understanding, they will come to it, but maybe they're just not there yet.
You know, I was thinking because somebody said something on Instagram to me and I wrote back and which I rarely do. The one advantage I think of getting out is that you have two frames of reference now. I have the frame of reference inside and outside. Now, can I fully inhabit my prior frame of reference? I can't. I sometimes have tried. I can get glimpses of what it feels like,
Mm,
the need I felt, the desperation I felt, the way that I would avoid any information that was contradictory, that if I looked at other information, it would mean something about me. So I didn't want to look at it. And I felt that the not looking at it was actually being noble. I
mm.
can talk about it, but I can't fully inhabit it. Um, in my attempts to try to understand where my head was at, I am finding myself building, more and more compassion. Like something that's happening recently in the United States. And I don't, on my podcast, I don't get into specifics about politics because I think there's so much propaganda and brainwashing going on. But I am interested in something that's going on right now in America, which is that some people, let's take the debate between, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Some people are horrified to have just realized that Joe Biden is compromised.
Mm.
Some people have known it for a long time. What I'm so interested in is the people that are in shock now because they didn't know that this man
Yeah.
was not all there. And it's curious because I'm like, I've been seeing it quite clearly because I don't need him to be a god.
Mm.
He's just a person
Yeah.
with a past
Yeah.
and not a great past either, you know. So I see a lot of cult-like dynamics in like how some of the press are like, no, he's this, and suddenly some of the press are like, oh my God, can you believe it? I'm like, yes, I can believe it because a lot of people have seen for quite some time. And again, this is not about Joe Biden, the
Yeah.
Democrats or anything. It's just about this pattern,
It's about
which
what it
is,
is. It's about being able to look at things and to say that even if we don't fully understand them, even if we're not happy with them, or even if we're excited about it, doesn't really matter. It's just about being able to sometimes see something as it is. Bearing in
yeah,
mind, bearing in mind, what we tend to do is we filter things through our belief system.
totally, totally.
And the thing about our beliefs is they're either fact or feeling.
Yes,
There's no third one.
yes,
And,
yes,
and in fact, one of the things we do in therapy sometimes is whenever we're, talking about beliefs, we're looking at beliefs. We're not saying you're wrong for thinking that, you're wrong believing
right,
that, but what we are
right.
doing is, help me understand what you believe and why you believe it.
Ah, lovely.
You
Yeah,
know, uh, um, and and sometimes depending on what it is, we might be looking at things like, could there be reasonable alternatives,
right.
or could there be, but it's really some. I can't remember who I can't remember who the philosopher was. It's going to come to me after we're finished
Mm,
talking.
mm,
There's a quote from him. It says that I would never die for my beliefs because I might be
mm,
wrong.
mhm,
And I think that's a
mhm,
good way of putting that.
mhm.
They're either fact or feeling, but beliefs can be so deeply ingrained in us sometimes. The thought of
Yeah.
changing them.
They can, and I was thinking about when you talked about the enablers, because in essence, I think that was the horror for me. There was
Mm,
many. That was one of the horrors that I had been an enabler. And so I agree with you. Look, there are some leaders, in whatever context that, you could say, oh, that's a bad leader. That's a malignant leader. That's a leader that has some kind of, pathology. But the reason they can continue is because of the enablers,
yeah, the people
you know.
around
Yeah, and some of them really are some serious flying monkeys. So that's why I'm so interested now in the mindsets that people have.
you.
I'm interested. like I really do think that the whole idea of having a conversation and steel manning somebody else's,
Hmm.
belief, I think is a great idea. Like, can you
Yeah,
understand why somebody thinks or feels the way they feel? Because if I go back into my prior frame of existence, what I feel in my body is so much fear that you're not aware of. Like it's so much stress to maintain the collective delusion in the
yeah,
cult. And that's why when you wake up, my entire body just, I mean, I would sleep for like 14 hours at a stretch. I'd go and talk to
yeah.
the FBI and sleep for 3 days. Just so exhausted trying to process, everything that happened and all the evidence and all kinds of things. But I think it's important. I love the way you said it, like when you're talking to a client, I think we should have these kinds of conversations, not at a therapeutic level like yourself, but have these kind of conversations with people we disagree with.
Mm.
Like why do they believe what they believe? It's just saying you're a bad human being is not,
It's
not a
it's
way to go.
it's a way to shut down a conversation.
Yeah, yeah,
And
it
I
is.
guess, and I'm thinking, particularly again, just on even a one-on-one narcissistic relationship, conversations are shut down because again, the need for validation, the need for people to collude with them, the last thing they want is some kind of challenge. The last thing
Yeah,
they want is reality.
yeah, yeah,
It's a very, in spite of the bravado, the grandiosity, and things like that, it's very shame-based. It's all about
yeah,
rejecting reality because reality brings shame. And
yeah.
what's just come to my head is something you mentioned earlier on, way at the beginning. You mentioned that, and I'll paraphrase how I heard it. What you didn't see from him was a lot of grandiose behavior.
Hmm.
What you
Hmm.
saw was other people.
Hmm.
Now, it's the thing about narcissism. If you look at, the different characteristics, traits, the diagnostic criteria, and all that, there is grandiose behavior. But if you think of the different ways that narcissism manifests, one of those ways is communal narcissism. In other words, that what
Yes,
they do is they all feed off each other. They all validate
yes,
and collude with each other. They are all
yes,
special and unique. It's everybody else are the villains. We have the answers. They're all bad.
yes,
But what you get is someone at the top of that. And what they do is they will tell people privately over a coffee, maybe they'll tell people different stories, little things they've done, and it'll just be here and there. But the next thing you know, you get a newcomer, someone's new on the scene or whatever, and everyone's coming up and they're saying, "Do you know he's got 15 degrees from different universities? Did you know that, she
yes,
found a cure for whatever and the
yes,
whole community, science community rejected it? Did you know that that person, they give all of their money to charity? There's nothing they wouldn't do." So they're not hearing this face to face because chances are if someone's looking you right in the eye and telling you all about how amazing they are, you're within minutes you're going to know,
yes,
okay, this is not.
yes.
But what you're hearing it is you're hearing it from everybody else. You're not hearing it from them. So then when you're in their presence, it's implanted in your head. They do all this, they have all that. And look at how unassuming they are. They just seem so down to earth, just like
Yeah,
me. So you just
yeah,
you get reeled into it. So there
yeah,
is a grandiosity, but
yeah.
it's not the individual themselves doing it. It's everybody they have lied to pretty much.
It's true. And actually, a great example, I think, for people that maybe I love what you just said. If anybody goes, well, I don't think I would do that, fall prey to that. Think about the way you are when you meet a movie star. If you
Mm,
ever met a movie star, well, think about the way you are when you meet royalty.
mm.
That movie star or that member of royalty has never told you how incredible they are, but you have like maybe a lifetime or a
Yeah,
decade of stories so that when you meet them, you're giddy,
yeah,
you're infatuated, that they're larger than life,
yeah.
I mean, I know when I first moved to LA and I would run into stars, I was like, oh my God. I don't have it anymore because like, you work with these people all the time, so it's like whatever. But I know what that's like. And I wonder, I've never met any royalty. Um, but I wonder, would I still fall prey to that kind of visceral adoration, the giddiness? I might. I
Well,
don't know.
I mean, it depends who it was, but I would speculate if you were to meet someone who is, let's say, the royalty or they're a president, a prime minister, that's someone very powerful, very, very famous. and you were to meet them and they were standoffish, they were aloof, they might even be rude and arrogant,
Mm,
chances are you're not going to be that impressed.
true.
But if you
True.
met the same person and they were funny, they were charming, they smiled at you, they laughed at your jokes, they asked you questions about yourself, gave you
Yes.
a compliment, then
Yes.
that's when that would come up. You know, oh, they're a really, really great
That's
person. And
true.
they're so powerful, they're so famous, and they're talking to me as if we're buddies.
That's true. That's exactly right. That's very true. That's very true. Because I've met leaders that are complete assholes. I'm like, ugh, yeah. No, that's very true. It's so interesting. I think, and I think you know this. So we met at Richard Grannon's seminar in Liverpool, and Grannon and I did a course called Decoding Cults and Narcissists.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons that I wanted to do the course, with him was because I had my personal experience of cults and he had a lot of, experience with narcissism. But one of the reasons is because I really believe that, for somebody that's been in a narcissistically abusive relationship, let's say personally or a family or work, looking at a cult framework is very useful because when you start to see the entire cult framework, you realize,
Yeah.
oh, wait, that's the same framework that I'm in. I just can't
Yeah.
see it, but I can see it here,
Yeah.
you
You can
know?
recognize it. It's like I said earlier on when I watched that program, and I just saw
Hmm.
minutes of, but within those 10 minutes, that scene was highlighting, how these cult-like movements get people to join.
Yes.
But what was striking me more and more was what they were playing out in real time was a
Yes.
narcissistically abusive relationship.
Yes.
And even if it gets that, I have all the resources, so you can't say no. I've created a system where I now have all the resources. You don't have a support network. I'm the only person in your life, so
Yes.
you need me.
Yes.
Um, yeah, and going back to the patterns, it's an expression I use all the time when I'm talking about different things on my channel. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yes.
You try to unsee it, you're in denial. You can
Yes.
actually see it. You see it playing out.
Yes. That's exactly right. I think that's what happened with me. Once I could see what was going on, I was astonished. And then it's sort of you take these new spectacles and you look at things, you go like, oh, that's what's going on. Because for me, the big mystery was in real life, I had a conversation with Ranieri the year before I left saying there's a psychopath in the organization in real life. Um, many, many years after that story, because I could see evidence of a psychopath. And so I was walking with him saying, there's a psychopath. And he says, who do you think it is? And I said, I think it's so and so. And he said, well, why do you think that? And I go, because of this. And then he sort of did this weird word salady thing with
Mm,
me. And I was just off somewhere else until, so I began to get it. Yes, there's a psychopath. Once I saw it was him, everything made sense.
yeah.
Everything, like the feeling of insanity of what had happened went away. Now I was dealing with, the fallout, the stress, the PTSD, the complex PTSD, they're trying to indict us on criminal charges. They've got private investigators
Yeah.
following us. They're trying to get the FBI to arrest us. I mean, that's a different level of fear.
Yeah.
But the feeling of like I can't make sense of anything, suddenly I could make sense of things. And I was like, that's what I'm looking at. Holy shit.
It can almost become predictable. You do know what they're going to do next. And I
Yes.
would say that on one hand, it is good to be informed, to be forewarned,
Yes.
forearmed. But on the other side of that, just as you said, it enhances the fear because you also know what they're capable of.
Yes. Yes. Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
And
That's exactly right.
you know it's not going to be easy. So, and,
No.
and and what I was going to say is, when you mentioned the course you did with Richard Grannon, now Richard did let me have a look at the course, and I would say
Oh,
there's
okay.
some really really good stuff on it.
Nice.
What I liked about it is the conversations the two of you are having. They're real world conversations that people can identify with. They'll see it,
Hmm.
they'll recognize it. There's no, what will we call it? No convoluted psychobabble. It's just,
No.
conversations that people can identify with. They can recognize it. Anybody watching, listening, yeah, have a look at that course if you need a bit of help and support. There's some really good info on it. I think people would find it really helpful.
It's very good. And also the thing I liked about it is that we put it inside, you know, a framework that Richard has. So at the
Mm.
end of these wonderful discussions, um, he would then explain, you know, the sort of mechanics of the thing in a way that
Yeah.
I thought was quite wonderful. I learned a lot, by the way, during shooting that course. I learned a tremendous amount as well. We both did. We both learned from each other, you know. It was great.
But I would like to ask as well about what you're working on at the moment and what's up and coming. You're working on a movie at the moment.
Yeah. So way back in 2017, when my wife said to me, gave me the article about narcissism, you know, and I began to study it very deeply, and then what is sociopathy, you know, what is psychopathy, dark triad, you know, dark tetrad. And she said to me, this was maybe after the trial was done. She said to me, because I constantly was talking about narcissism as it
Mm.
relates to cult, and she said to me, why don't you make a film about this? Why don't you make a film about narcissism? And I thought, oh, yes, that's what I need to do. So I connected with a producer friend of mine who had actually been in Nexum as well, and we began working on a project. The current title is Empathy Not Included. It might change. It might be called The Narcissist Playbook, but you know,
Mhm.
we're still not sure. But we've spent probably a good 2.5 years, you know, shooting it and editing it. We're almost done. And what we do in the film is we sort of look at, you know, what is narcissism, what is
Mhm.
narcissistic abuse, and we speak to clinicians, you know, neuroscientists, you know, psychologists, psychiatrists. We speak to a number of victims. And then also what we do is we speak to four self-confessed narcissists. You know, one is what I call low range, low
Yeah.
level. One is sociopathic, you know, one is malignant, and you know, one is a full-blown psychopath. And in interviewing these people, which is so wonderful, they talk about what they believe, what
Mhm.
they think of us, and what they do to people.
Mhm.
And the reason I thought that was so important was because people still struggle with overlaying all their own empathy and goodness on the entire world, not understanding, no, these people really exist. They're not like us. They're different. And I sort of wanted to get through the Pollyanna wall of denial
Mm.
that I think people have. So we've come up with a film that I think is really amazing. As I said, you know, I think we have the last few months left of work on it. We should be able to release it by the end of the year, I hope. I highly recommend anybody who's struggling with these things to check it out. The best way to keep tabs on it is there's a website currently called www.empathynotincluded.com.
Okay.
There's also an Instagram page. You can also just follow me to figure out what's going on because I talk about stuff at regular intervals. But I'm super excited about that. Then I have another series that I'm finishing as well.
Mhm.
Then I have a whole bunch of projects that sort of are, you know, are sort of up next. But the thing I'm most focused right now on is finishing Empathy Not Included.
No, that does sound like a must watch. I'll definitely give that a watch.
It is fascinating. It is fascinating. I mean, I look at it and go like, my God, this is so fascinating. I can't wait for the world to see it, you know?
It's, I think human beings, as a rule, I think are incredibly fascinating. As a
Yeah.
species go, we're fascinating. We are, what I find really interesting about us is we can be at our best whenever things are at their worst,
Yes.
but we can also be at our worst when things are at their best.
I agree with that.
And
I
that's
agree with that.
sounds so strange.
Yeah.
We're the only creature on this planet that needs to know things we don't know. We get
I
anxious and
know.
stressed if we don't know things.
I know.
And we need to know what to do whenever we don't know what to do. So I
I
think human
know.
beings are fascinating. And we talk about different personality types when it comes to narcissism. I think it can be a very complex thing. And yet the patterns are so predictable.
So predictable. I know.
Regardless of where they are in the spectrum and how it might manifest in different
Yeah,
ways, it can be incredibly predictable.
I agree. And I think where people get caught up, it's sort of like saying, well, that person was wearing a red suit
Mm.
versus another suit, so they can't be that. And instead of looking at like the
Mm.
patterns involved,
Yeah.
and this is, as you were saying, like people think that narcissism is all grandiose. I tend to agree that it just cycles, you know, backwards and
Yeah.
forwards, and there's both. But I do see that some people present as very grandiose, and people think, okay, well, that's what narcissism is. And then when they see somebody who's very suffery and weepy, they think, well,
Yeah.
that's not narcissism. Not to say that everybody who's
Yes, I
suffering
know
and
what you
who's
mean.
weepy is a narcissist,
But
But
with what you're describing there is covert or vulnerable narcissism,
yeah,
and the difference is now there is still grandiosity, but the difference is it's all internalized, and
yes,
they believe that they are misunderstood, unappreciated,
yes, yes,
ignored.
yes.
They get very upset because people aren't seeing their greatness.
It's true. In fact, I think Raniere still, it's so funny. I just got the news yesterday that Raniere was beaten up in prison again. He's in prison in Arizona. Um, Apparently he writes complaints about the Bureau of Prisons. The Bureau of Prisons is like their own country, basically. Like they have complete control over the prisons. The FBI have no control whatsoever. But apparently he's complaining every day. And so the story goes that they bunked him with somebody who beat him up in for revenge. I don't think that's good, by the way. But he still believes, like from what I'm hearing, he's trying to convince everybody in the prison population of like how magnificent he is. So he tries to help them, not to help them, but to get the adoration you spoke of, you know, that complex, soup of adoration and control and everything. He's
Yeah.
still doing the same things. And he really believes that he's a misunderstood genius. Like I think he believed that when he walked into court, that he would blow everybody away with his understanding. In fact, I said to the FBI, I said he's waiting for his chance to stand up and do his great speech.
Hmm.
He wants to do his,
He
John
wants
Galt
his
speech.
hero moment. Yeah, his
He
hero
wants his
moment.
hero moment. I said, I'm telling you, that's what he's going to do. I was wrong because his defense counsel, all five lawyers, convinced him not to do that. And I think they did that because they knew that the minute he got up and spoke, everybody were like, oh my God, who is this lunatic? Because in his mind, he is the misunderstood genius. Like everything he was doing with these women, if only they would realize that breaking them down and breaking their personality and having them have,
Yeah.
the death of their psyche would ultimately free them while they gave him blowjobs. He still, that all still makes sense in
Yeah.
there. I leave you with
Well,
blowjobs. See, I leave you with blowjobs.
something came into my head. I was trying to remember who was said. I think it was Karl Popper. Those who promise us, those who promise us heaven on earth never deliver anything but a hell.
Yes. Yes.
And I suppose
It's
something
true.
else, it's just something else just popped into my head when you said about even in the prison. You think of even in the diagnostic criteria, there's fantasies of unlimited power and
Yeah.
control and things like that. Now,
Yeah.
even even in a situation, it doesn't matter whether they're in a prison, it doesn't matter whether they're, working in a fast food place, they just happen to be the supervisor, whatever. It's all about some kind of power and control. And it's
Yeah.
how they get that. If they can't get it through bullying, blackmailing, from, being your best friend, they'll find some way.
Yeah.
And just what I'm thinking of is, when you're saying about how you can help people, there's fictional, albeit he's fictional, but there was a very famous psychopath once said, when the rabbit screams, the fox comes a running, but not the
Mm.
help.
Mm.
Was it Hannibal Lecter?
Hmm.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I'm actually going to rewatch. I'm going to rewatch those films, by the way.
I've watched a few of them, and I know a few different actors have played Lecter, and I think they all bring something different to it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think he's a very, very good character. I know the most famous one, Silence of the Anthony Hopkins.
Hmm.
I think he's very, very good, but by the time you've watched him, maybe in the second movie, he stops being a psychopath and just becomes some kind of supervillain.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's that law of diminishing returns that sequels
Yeah.
tend to have.
Yeah. Yeah.
But other than that, yeah, I think he's very, very well written character.
He is. He is. What was that show? The British show, Dear Eve. Is it Dear Eve? Killing Eve. Killing
Killing
Eve.
Eve. Yes, yes,
Yeah. I really enjoyed Killing Eve.
I haven't seen it. I believe it's
Oh,
good, but I haven't seen it.
the first
She's a female
episode,
psychopath, isn't she?
female psychopath, yeah. The first episode, there's a scene in an ice cream parlor. I highly recommend you watch it because you see you see a psychopath. You know, that she inhabits that character amazingly, and she is so charismatic and so interesting and so exciting and so twisted.
Mm,
You know, and I don't watch these things really because I enjoy the twisted stuff, but like I enjoy watching people who understand how it works. I really do.
yeah. Yeah. There's I don't know if you've seen it, but and it was filmed in my neck of the woods, so a little bit of pride there. Uh,
Yeah.
did you ever watch The Fall? Gillian Anderson and Jamie Dornan.
Yes. Yes.
Jamie Dornan's character is
Yes.
amazing. He is so spot on. Even the split between good Paul and bad Paul.
Yes.
Murdering the girls, but then afterwards, washing and putting their makeup on. He's
Yes.
in his mind, he's undoing the bad thing that bad Paul
Yes.
does.
Yes.
Absolutely incredible performance. Good
Yes. I need
stuff.
to rewatch that.
Mm.
That was shot near you, huh?
It was, yeah, and it's funny at the time it was on television. I remember friends, pointing out, they were all talking about it and they were pointing out, yeah, he's a therapist. Yeah, he he works with couples. Yeah, okay, so
Ah, the things you've seen, the things you've seen.
absolutely. Mark, where can people find you? You mentioned Instagram earlier on. Where else can people?
Yeah, I think the best place is generally Instagram, you know, at Mark Vicente. I have the YouTube channel, which is the
Mhm.
my podcast, and obviously my podcast is on all the platforms as well. I'm on what used to be Twitter, X as well. But I spend most of my time on Instagram though. That's where I can be found. And then I also have a website, markvicente.com as well. Not hard to find.
You're not hiding.
Not hiding.
But what I would say, anybody who hasn't been on Mark's channel or listened to his podcast, I would recommend you do so. There are some really, really interesting, fascinating conversations with some very interesting people. And what I like about your channel when you're talking to people and it's like you're exploring different things. You're not just
Hmm.
talking about what it is, but you're exploring, you're asking
Hmm.
questions, and you're getting
Hmm.
perspectives from really interesting people in different areas. So
Yeah.
it's.
I am trying to figure things out. I mean, I'm assuming now that that will always be the case in life. You know, I don't believe anymore in one day you arrive. I think I did, which was not very smart. I just think I'm just fascinated, you know,
Yeah.
at stuff.
I'll leave you with a thought. Disney said we could because we do always learn.
Mm,
We will look back at ourselves at some point, and we do look back at ourselves in different situations, different relationships, and we're wondering what the hell was I thinking? What I'm gonna just ask you to think about is what we're doing is we are judging ourselves through the eyes of the person we are today,
mm,
with today's information, with today's knowledge, with today's wisdom. Didn't have that back then. That's often what we're doing. And it doesn't matter what age you were.
mhm,
We could be 10 years of age. We could be, 20 years of age. We could be 30, 40. It doesn't matter. We look back at things with regret, with wonder, with pain. It doesn't matter. What we're doing is we're judging ourselves through who we are today.
mm.
If you had today's information back then, it would have been very different.
Yeah. But maybe I couldn't have gotten today's perspective had I not gone through what I went through. Who knows?
It's true.
Yeah.
Mark, it's been an absolute privilege, and I would like to do this again sometime.
Let's
Maybe
do it.
said earlier, just before we were recording, when the movie comes out, and I've watched it a
Yes.
few times, so I know what I'm talking about. Be nice to
Yes.
talk about it.
I would love to. I would love to. Thank you.
No problem. You take care.